So hello my friends, Devon Lennox here, Photography PX. In today's video, I'm going to show you guys in a few simple steps how to fix uneven tones in Photoshop. Alright, so here we are in Adobe Photoshop. This is the image on screen that we're going to be fixing today, and I'm going to show you guys the before and after. So let's tab over and I will show you guys ultimately what we're doing here and what the issue was. So if I undo this, and this was just a very quick fix. I didn't want to do the selections perfectly because that's not really the goal, is doing selections. But if you guys will, let me zoom in here. You guys will notice that this area right here is kind of really pink and it has a lot of rosacea. So the goal, when I say fixing uneven tones or colors, uneven skin tones, that kind of stuff, this is kind of what I'm referring to. There's a lot of different nomenclature when it comes to fixing uneven tones. Sometimes that could be brightness or maybe like shadows and highlights on a person's skin. But for today's video, it's fixing discoloration is really what we're doing. So that's what we're going to be fixing in really just like two simple steps. So first and foremost is identifying the problem and being okay, relative to all of the rest of this image, this chest area is just way too pink, it's too red. Everything else is kind of like this neutral gray and brownish kind of cream color. So identifying the problem. So we've identified that. So we're gonna set up a new layer. We're gonna use our brush tool, so hit B, and we're going to basically select an area that we think has the color of the skin that we would prefer to be. So we can do somewhere over here, we can do up here on the cheek, but ultimately you're going to use the Alt key and you're gonna use the ink dropper and select an area that you think has a better color for where you want to basically paint over the area that's discolored or it has some issues. So we're going to then go back over here to our blend modes for our layers, and we're gonna go down to color. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to paint in that area that we need to address in terms of color. Now we have to work through this in a couple of different ways, just because it's not just color alone. It's also going to be saturation as well. But essentially, what you're going to do is just paint in the areas that you think just need to be addressed. Okay, and I'll show you guys the before and after there. Okay, so now we've addressed the color aspect. Now the biggest thing here is now we're gonna have to ultimately fix and play around with the saturation and make sure the saturation of this area is the way that it needs to be, as far as making sure it looks cohesive with the rest of the image. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're actually gonna go create a new layer. We're gonna go to the blend mode and change that to saturation instead. And now we're gonna pick an area, another skin tone in the frame that has the saturation that we want it. So that could be anywhere. This is going to be something you're going to have to kind of play around with. Inevitably, there's no really easy ways to do this, but essentially what you're going to do is paint over. And now that's too desaturated, so I picked the wrong area. Let me get an area over here that has a little bit more saturation. That was a little bit of a wrong color. Somewhere over here, maybe? Yeah, that should be okay. And then you're going to pick an area that has the right amount of saturation that you're looking for. This is something that's going to be a little bit of trial and error, just because there's a lot of different gradations and differences of color as you're using the ink dropper. So it's going to be a little bit of trial and error to find something that looks suitable, but essentially it doesn't need to be perfect. We're just going to do that. So I'll show you the before and after. Very subtle difference, but it ended up bringing a little bit of the reds. Now, if you still think like, okay, this is still too desaturated, what you can do is do a new layer. You can actually just use your brush tool and you can go over here to your color picker, and then you can go into, let's say, a brownish kind of yellowish tone and do something like this, and then specifically add that color. Let me change this to saturation. Specifically add that specific color, which that wasn't saturated enough. So okay, we'll go down over here, kind of add that color, add that color back in, that saturation back in that we're missing, add that back in, and then basically purposely decrease the opacity until you get a amount of saturation that you think is more natural and sufficient. I think that's actually fine, so we can kind of leave it somewhere around here. Okay, now let's group those layers together. We're gonna do Shift A or Shift Select and then Control or Command G. And then group those together, and I'll show you the before and after. So we've addressed that. Now that we have our skin tones more cohesive across the entirety of the frame, now we can use basically adjustment layers as far as HSL or color balance or color mixer or curves to then change the entirety of the skin tones to reflect our specific style. But this is the first and foremost the step that you have to take to make sure you get all the skin tones more even before you start changing the skin tones to make them more red or more yellow. But I'll show you guys that right now. So what we do, we just go into reds. If I'm going to be using HSL, hue, saturation, luminance, and then we just increase the saturation of the whole thing, and then we can change the saturation to like something over here, and then now it's a lot more even than it was before. And I will continue to group those, and then now you guys can see the before and after. So like now the entire frame, obviously, I would still retouch this area and fix that, but you guys can see the before and after of this entire area just being very pink and having that color. And then now it's more in alignment with the rest of it. Granted, I still think it looks a little bit desaturated, so I'd still work on it a little bit more, but essentially that is what you do. Those are the steps that you take, and then you just kind of play around with, I wouldn't do the master, but you just play around with the reds and yellows, and you get to a point that you think you're happy with. That would be too much, but yes, essentially it'd be somewhere over there, and then you just kind of play around with that, and then you get to a final image. So, I hope this added some value to you guys. I hope this was a little bit insight on fixing and tackling this specific issue in Photoshop. There are a lot of ways to do this technique, but this is just kind of the way that I found over the years to be the most effective way to do this. I probably will do a future video explaining some of the other techniques, just if you guys are curious, but I will show you guys some of the other ones as well. But as always, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. If you haven't already, definitely we have some awesome content coming up soon. Please like and comment on this video. Let me know if I missed anything in the comments down below. I'd love to answer your questions, and let's start a discussion. And until the next time, in the next video, my friends, peace out. Take care.